Hi, I'm Peter Santiscano, and this is Bubble and Squeak. Our show today is about sex, gender, and Jesus. And to get the best experience, I recommend listening with headphones. Today's show comes in 4 parts. Part 1, Revd Dr. Tina Beardsley is a priest in the Anglican Church in England. She's also a trans woman who co-authored the book Affirming Churches. Part 2, Casey Chu, also known as Panda Dulce, is a filmmaker and one of the founding drag queens of Drag Story Hour. In June 2022, far-right extremists stormed her Drag Story Hour in an attempt to silence her. Kyle recently published the book The Queen Bees of Tybee County. Part 3, Reverend Beverly Dale is a writer, performer, vocalist, and ordained minister. Her career spans parish work and over 2 decades of campus ministry at the University of Pennsylvania. Revd Bev is the founder of the Incarnation Institute for Sex and Faith. Her work centers on healing religious sexual shame and promoting a sex-positive, inclusive Christian theology that affirms the body and pleasure as sacred. And Part 4, a sound slice of Quakers kicking up some dirt. Tina Beardsley is one of those people who surprises you. She's an Anglican priest, a theologian, and an openly trans woman. She's been doing the work long before it was safe or even imaginable to some. Tina was ordained way back in 1978 and spent over 20 years as a parish priest before moving into healthcare chaplaincy. She eventually headed up a multi-faith team at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London. All this while transitioning right in the thick of it when bishops were unsure and the church was, let's just say, not exactly ready. But Tina did it anyway.
If people are quite binary, like I would say I am, then you do have to be prepared to learn, really, from other people and listen to their stories. We evolve. Let's put it this way. I think I evolved in my understanding of myself. I guess I've come to a fairly sort of binary position where I see myself like as a woman with a trans history. And I can also recall being at Greenbelt, the Christian Arts Festival, a few years ago, on a panel. I think were there 3 or 4 of us. I was the old one. A friend of mine was the middle-aged one, and then there was the young one, and they were non-binary. I couldn't see the audience because we had lights shining in our eyes, but our prep for this panel had been really fun. And I remember thinking, oh wow, the future is non-binary. I thought, this is amazing. Then I thought of the bishops who were all my age, and I thought, they're not going to like this one little bit. This particular priest, young priest, he had organised an event and they'd invited a non-binary priest to speak. It proved very controversial indeed. Some of the pushback he got was actually from older gay male clergy who were known to have partners, but the partners never went to events, you didn't know their names. It was the friend who lived at the vicarage. But they were the most critical of this event. And somehow this non-binary priest proved a real trigger for them. of something beyond their experience, or something almost about shame, really. I'm not quite sure what it was.
This reminds me of some event that you and I were at that I think you invited me to, where it was Church of England queer clergy. And I remember I learned there about how cisgender gay men were some of the strongest opponents to the ordination of women.
Mm-hmm.
Am I remembering this correctly?
Yes, that group, it had been very well supported, but then it split. So when women were ordained and it was decided to admit lesbian clergy to that group left. Which is sad, really. I suppose they could see that women would be invited to celebrate Mass or whatever. Maybe that's why they went. It seemed that what we had in common as a group that was experiencing oppression in the church wasn't sufficient to keep the group together. One of the leading opponents of conversion therapy, Jane Ozanne, she has a national profile in encouraging a ban on conversion therapy here. She was an advisor on the LGBT advisory panel to the UK government, but she resigned. The reason she resigned was because they were not listening to the trans people on that group. The narrative there is that, yes, we've got to ban conversion therapy for lesbian and gay people, but actually they talk about transing the gay. This is the narrative. And I think what Jane was saying was they're not listening to trans people. The organisations they are listening to are the very gender critical groups. Trans people are reluctant to appear in the media and debate their own lives, or they're just not invited. You'll have television and radio discussions about these issues in inverted commas, and you won't hear a trans person's voice. Our media is incredibly gender critical. You know, the Times, the Sunday Times. I think somebody did a study and there were over 1,000 articles in 12 months about trans people. We're a tiny, tiny percentage of the UK population, and most of it is negative. So people are being drip-fed this stuff all the time. You know, it's misinformation. It's not right. It's far-fetched, and it's far from our reality. It's just not true. But it's being said very persistently, persuasively, strongly, all the time. And so I think it's hard for people, if they're within those circles, to differentiate. So I think being very careful about what you say. Yeah, going back to critical, I think we have to be critical. The allies have to be critical of what's coming at them through mainstream media. I mean, there's a high-profile case in the UK where a young trans woman took her own life. The mother is a doctor, a very well-informed person about lots of medical things, but was repeating at the meal table the things she was reading in the media. The trans daughter had not come out. Now that the daughter has taken her own life, she carries enormous guilt for the things she said, ill-informed, not knowing what her daughter would be thinking, feeling. The UK population are pretty liberal on the whole around these sort of issues. They've either got somebody trans in their family, in their workplace, in their social circle, in their church. People are out nowadays in a way that they weren't in the past. So therefore, they're not going to be taken in by this stuff. But I think it is really hard if it's coming at you all the time. So understanding the misinformation. I mean, some people would say, don't read all this stuff in the paper. If your friends say things that are repeating it, challenge it. And this is where we need to approach it a little bit more compassionately. Because what we found was, and this is something you yourself have spoken about quite movingly about your own childhood as well, that when you're young and your trajectory is you're going to be attracted to someone of the same sex, that isn't necessarily very obvious as a young person. What can be obvious is this gender nonconformity. And so some of these gay men will have experienced criticism, anger from parents, correction of behaviour because of their gender non-conforming patterns of speech or the way they played and so on.
I get that. I was bullied for being a sissy long before I realized I was gay. So I shoved everything in the closet. My orientation, sure, but also that soft, flamboyant, tender part of me. Years later, I came out as gay. But that sissy boy, he stayed gagged and bound deep inside. To be whole, to be strong, I had to go back for him. I had to rescue that sissy boy and make space for him in my adult life. I've heard gay men talk about trans women and non-binary folks with contempt, sometimes to their faces, but often behind their backs. And when I hear it, I wonder, are they actually just talking to the parts of themselves they still hate? The parts they were taught to hide or destroy? So many of us carry old wounds, and sometimes instead of healing them, we pass the pain along. A gay man who once got punished for being effeminate learns to hate anything that reminds him of that weakness. So he unloads that hate onto a trans woman or a femme gay man or anyone who dares to be both queer and free. And then there's the question, why do some straight men attack gay men? Why are they offended by trans women? Is it always about some deep down closeted desire? Maybe sometimes, but I think there's more to it. A lot of boys, more than we like to admit, are sexually abused by men, sometimes by men who identify as gay, often not. Abuse isn't usually about attraction, it's about power, control, humiliation. And in a world that tells men to be strong and dominant and invulnerable, where do those abused boys go with their pain? Who helps them name the confusion, the shame, especially if the experience was both repulsive and at times physically arousing? What happens when they see two men in love, holding each other, touching with tenderness? Sometimes I think it stirs up all those buried feelings, the pain. And with no tools, no words, no safe places to process any of it, they lash out. Not because of what they see, but because of what they've never been allowed to feel.
How can we talk about these things? Because we don't talk about them. And then it will come out in these distorted reactions and responses. When you hear what happens to people who are vulnerable, maybe because they are having to transition without hormones, and it's very obvious that they are not conforming to gender stereotypes, then they can be on the receiving end of verbal and even physical abuse. There are these people who are saying these negative things within the LGBT community, but in fact, the majority of LGBT people in the UK are affirming. This was proved at Pride when a small group tried to head up the parade with anti-trans banners and were removed. They do not represent the majority. They do not represent most people in Britain. It's just that they have very loud voices and, because of funding, access to the media.
Okay, let's be honest. Some of the deepest wounds queer folks carry don't come from straight people. They come from inside the house, from our own communities. The body shaming, the racial exclusion, the way trans folks get pushed to the margins. So what do we do with all that? Kyle Casey Chu, also known as Panda Dulce, is a drag artist, a writer, and lifelong imagination machine. You might remember a viral video Panda was reading to children at a drag story hour. Suddenly, Proud Boys and other extremists stormed the library, filming and shouting them down. But in our conversation, we go beyond the headlines. We talk deep stuff like queer disappointment, queer invention, how we build new worlds when the old ones shut us out.
I have this compulsive need to write and to act and to create and to do drag, and at any given moment, 50 different ideas will cycle through my head. Committing them to paper, to screen, to face is how I process them and put them out into the world.
A big part of your story that gets covered a lot is a traumatic incident that occurred. And I want to decenter that. I mean, it's important, obviously. There's no question about it. But I'm curious about beginning long before anyone ever called you Panda Dulce.
Thanks so much for decentering that, because I feel like it's such a moth to a flame allure to jump right into the trauma of it all. So yeah, I was born and raised in San Francisco alongside my twin brother, Kevin, who has autism. Early on, he needed a lot of services, and so I often found myself watching movies, reading books. I was in a gym playing basketball by myself as he was getting swim lessons from Special Olympics, in the waiting rooms for speech therapists. It was kind of up to me to construct my own worlds. I had a lot of energy, I had a lot of creativity. It was hard to keep me seated in a classroom. Whenever somebody asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? Singular. I would say, I want to be an actress. I want to be an ice skater, a detective. I want to be a writer. I want to be a director. And they'd say, oh, that's so silly of you to say. And someday you're going to have to choose. I never chose. And so this is who I am. I just do a lot of different things at once.
I get this sense you're a very energetic person who puts out a lot, but you also seem to be an introverted person who is deeply reflective.
Oh my gosh, I feel so seen. Yeah, as it turns out, not all drag queens are constant validation-seeking extroverts who enjoy nightlife. In fact, there are grandmas among us, as a company included. Well, I'm kind of a night owl, but still, I like to stay in. I like to read. I like coffee shop vibes, which is kind of why a lot of my drag has pivoted to youth work during the day, because I cannot stay up until 2 a.m. doing death drops on a temporary box stage in the bar. Yeah, so I've had to kind of cultivate a different path that's different from the traditional like kakada 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 ba drag queen. And it's funny because when I tell people I do drag, they say, "Oh, where can I see you perform?" They're expecting that, and it's just not who I am.
How did imagination show up in your childhood?
I went to school in San Francisco, elementary school. It was a very gender-divided playground in that the girls played foursquare and the boys played kickball. I didn't like the machismo of kickball. I was always picked last kind of person just because I was all up in place. And foursquare got a little cutthroat and competitive as well. And so instead, my friend Nikki and I, who is also queer, would kind of create our own world of imagination. Like, we are explorers and we're going to like go on the monkey bars and we're going to find this like hidden idol, blah, blah, blah. And we just like always developed some sort of like wild narrative that was surely some sort of imaginative offshoot of a Nickelodeon show we just watched. I'd be left to my own devices in the backyard. I wasn't allowed to like make a tree house, nail boards into the tree. And so I just used a bunch of planks and made a little seat for myself and read out there and spent a lot of time digging holes. I tried to make my own little toilet in the backyard because I was like, I'm gonna live out here now and this is my world. And once I actually like pooped in a little hole and I was like, see, it's there. My mom was like, you are coming inside. Put your shirt on. So I was just a weird little kid. I was just a weird little boundless kid. I can't believe I just shared that story. I've never told that story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And that child self of yours, loving books, writing, creating, how does that connect with the book you just published?
In a lot of ways, fantasy is protective, and that it's something that we can retreat into when the real material world is hostile or unforgiving or unwelcoming. That is a lot of what structures drag. It is reimagining ourselves in our own terms, with humor, with grandiosity, showing up in a way that the straight world might not understand or appreciate.
Like, there's something to me sacred about drag. And I say that because I was trapped in conversion therapy for 17 years before I finally came to my senses. I was living in Memphis, Tennessee, and I remember the first drag show I attended, somebody handed me $1 and said, "Go, give her $1." She was a bawdy, raucous, whatever, but that moment, that exchange, it was like something deeply spiritual in a strange way, or like even almost like ancient was happening.
Wow. I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that with me. That's quite an experience, and it's tremendous that you've come this far. For a lot of people, drag starts from a place of joy. A lot of the drag queens I know start doing drag on Pride or Halloween, and it's this fun little idea that's spun up with their friends in a moment of giddy pleasure where they're like, well, what if you went as a girl? And what if you did like this ridiculous thing and you wore this thing? Wouldn't that be so wild? And it's like we're attracted to this like shock value of it and how it's almost a joke. It's almost just humor. I think in a lot of straight environments, it could just be seen as so ridiculous and over the top that like no one could possibly take this seriously. And that's the only way that we can engage meaningfully with femininity as assigned male people is if it's a joke.
Yeah.
And in that moment where you are seen and where people do regard you in a different way and do often play into the humor of it or the fantasy of it, or, it brings that sort of frivolity out of them as well. There's a certain power to that, and there's a certain power to accessing that and being received by others, not with violence. It's just always been an avenue to access parts of ourselves that were forbidden or were maligned or put us at risk of ostracization, and instead of suppressing it or burying it deeper, making it bigger and louder and stronger and in many cases more glittering. In that sense, it is a space for healing. It is a vehicle for transformation and for coming into our full selves instead of a compartmentalized and hollow life.
Right now, it's really easy to see who our opponents are because they're so bold-faced about it. And I did see that dreadful video of the horrible things people were saying to you in the library. And we know that this government is not a friend to us at all. In protecting ourselves, we also are not always honest about queer spaces. You know, as an Asian queer, as someone doing drag, as an artist, where have you felt tension within queer spaces and how have you navigated that?
I think there's a queer community that I envisioned when I was younger, and then there's the queer community that I'm a part of now, and they are very distinct worlds. And mind you, I was growing up in San Francisco. I would walk through the historically queer Castro district as a kid and look longingly at the bars and be like, when I turn 21, that's when my life is going to begin. What I was marketed from Absolute Vodka, what have you, is it's this place of rainbows where everyone is accepted. It's kind of like an equalizing thing where everyone supports each other. We're just all queer and trans and happy. Of course, real life is more complicated than that. When I first started seeing people in college, it was the age of dating apps and all this, and it would be very common to encounter disclaimers that said, no Asians, like I don't date you, it's just a preference. And it's so like lightly dismissed as this personal preference as opposed to like stemming from historic national exclusion and racial exclusion and like a lineage of violence that a lot of people don't even know about. That really led me to read more about race, read more about sexuality in college and gender, and uncover how these attitudes were shaped and fomented by wartime propaganda and white supremacy. I can't, in good faith, say that it's all lollipops and rainbows. And I can't say that as a drag queen and as somebody who identifies as queer and trans, that this hasn't profoundly affected who spends time with me and who sees me as somebody worthy of romantic or sexual connection. Coming out of college, I had my guns blazing and I was just like a very dogmatic liberal arts grad who was like, we must change the world like one art piece at a time. And I still believe that. And at the same time, I understand that there's a certain amount of acceptance that you need to have in that you cannot alone shift an entire paradigm. In the meantime, you also have to live, and you cannot spend your life waiting, as I did as a kid, for things to be perfect, because you'll be waiting a very long time, waiting instead of living. You may already know a trans person. There are many you haven't met. I implore you to reflect and investigate how much of your view of trans people is shaped by what you've been told, as opposed to having a conversation with a trans person who has needs for healthcare and education and shelter, food and clothing, employment, just like you do. So much of this hysteria is manipulation and has nothing to do with the individual you might speak to, and everything to do with larger forces at play that might be fucking you over too.
Attribute the success and value.
And what about bestiality? Ultimately, what about child molestation and pedophilia? How can we criminalize these things at the same time have constitutional amendments allowing same-sex marriage?
From what I know about Jesus, I don't think that he would be down with enacting violence on people that he knows nothing about. He was a pacifist socialist who hung out with sex workers. And I think it's important that we remember that and we return to that inflection point as his name is being invoked to animate violence towards small, already vulnerable communities like the trans community.
My name is Harvey Bill, and I'm here to recruit you. I'm tired of listening to the new plans, twist Bibles in the Bible, to the cut down the story out. I'm even more tired of the religious leaders of this nation who know it and remain silent. I'm tired of their silence.
So in light of all that, what draws you to public storytelling, especially in these moments of risk and visibility and vulnerability?
Well, it's funny how sometimes these conversations circle back in the perfect way, thematically. But I mentioned that as a kid, I created my own worlds. Because my brother needed so many services, I was left to my own devices, and a lot of the world that I experienced was through a screen or through a page. Before I had even cemented my own worldview, there was a worldview that was fed to me through media. And that worldview necessarily disregarded and excluded Asian Americans or queer and trans people from having dignified stories, from being three-dimensional, from being lead characters in their own narratives. And I realized how fundamentally that impacted how I view myself, my community, and the world. Even now as an adult, looking back, it was formative, and a lot of it is undoable. And so the reason why I'm drawn to public storytelling is because I want to create versions and microcosms of worlds that kids can have access to, that adults can have access to, that show us alternatives are possible, and that remind us of our possibility. I want us to think expansively instead of being constrained to what we're shown, because seeing is believing. And if you see a queer Asian American basketball player become a drag queen in the South, or a drag queen overcome public notoriety and choose herself, or an Asian American drag queen coming out to her grandpa at a senior center, or they just sure, whatever it is, then you might find the wherewithal within yourself to do it too.
After speaking with Tina and Kyle, I kept thinking about the ways our bodies carry stories, sacred ones, wounded ones, silenced ones, stories shaped by patriarchy, empire, trauma, and also by joy, resistance, and pleasure. Which brings us to Rev Bev. Beverly Dale, Rev Bev to her friends, is a poet, preacher, and provocateur who insists that our bodies are not shameful, they're divine. She's spent decades helping people of faith heal from sexual wounds inflicted by the church and culture. She kicks off our time together with a piece from her book, Who Told You That You Were Naked? It's a collection of sensual, liberating meditations that challenge the idea that spirit and body must be enemies.
Nobody told me that sex is fun. Sex is fun. Sex is fun. They only told me that sex is sin. Sex is sin. Sex is sin. And we all know that sin is bad. Sin is bad. Sin is bad. If fun is sin and sin is bad, then fun is bad. Fun is bad. Fun is bad. But we all know that sex is joy. Sex is joy. Sex is joy. And we all know that God is joy. God is joy. God is joy. And if sex is joy and God is joy, then sex is good. Sex is good. Sex is good. My name is Beverly Dale, and my friends call me Dale. Others call me Revd Bev. I work at the intersection of sexuality and spirituality. I have been a pastor in a small town church, been on a clergy team in another church, but the ministry that was the longest was 21 years at the University of Pennsylvania. I was an ecumenical campus minister there. And then I was a founder of a nonprofit that teaches a sex-positive Christianity to pastors, but also to sexual health professionals. So my 21 years at the University of Pennsylvania, I did a lot of work with fraternities and sororities, but also just people who were trying to live their lives as young adults, trying to figure out how to live in a purity culture and be moral, or how to not be labeled a slut and be sexually empowered. This was in the 90s. Sexual liberation was not as complete and as beautiful and as well thought out and as ethical as one would hope, given my years were in the 60s. People were really messed up then, but the church at that time, for the most part, was not talking about sexuality, and still, from my perspective, still is not, except when they can enforce repression and restrictions. I realized, my goodness, there's a whole bunch of us out here who are sexually wounded, and unfortunately, there was not anything positive coming from the church. We all are hearing the sex negative stuff, and so there's a lot of guilt being thrown around for any kind of sexual exploration, but also around orientation and gender issues. I have sexual health professionals who have informed me, and I've heard the stories as well, that it's a hot mess out there of young people trying to be obedient to what they think their sexual life has to be. And then when they get married with the legal piece of paper, they discover that all those harmful messages are still in their bodies and still in the bedroom. And so they hopefully seek out help, therapeutic help. But the therapist didn't know how to deal with the religious stuff and the Bible stuff and all of that. So that's where my books come in. The model in the Bible is polygamy, which means one man with enough money, land, status can have as many women as he wants. And that includes concubines, which is a nice fancy word for sex slave, and as many wives as he wants. And it's completely oblivious to pleasure, oblivious to rights of women. Women were property. And so it's no wonder when you grow up in Sunday schools or you hear that in the culture and from the evangelical churches, we have no guidelines. We don't know how to talk about sex. We have no comprehensive sex education throughout our culture. So everybody is on the ignorant side, getting their sex education from pornography, which is not education, it's entertainment. And that's its own thing. Conversion therapy, for those who don't know, there's a belief that you can choose your orientation. To go through their process of so-called therapy is the way to get up, and it will cost you money to do that, by the way, is going to convert you to be heterosexual. The conversion therapy is condemned and outlawed in many states and countries. Yet there is this push right now among straight and presumably gay men. I don't know, it's the incel movement or the pronatalist movement, both of which are in ascendancy right now. Men are not sure how to be men, sexual men. So there is this opting for making females the enemy and men as being the victims. I'm bringing that up. It's a separate issue. And yet there is this antipathy to sexuality. The one side that I'm talking about acknowledges that we have these strong, powerful drives and there's no females available for us. And the other side is the orientation towards the same gender. And yet, what do we do with that? Because there's no guidance on it. If I had a way to wave a magic wand or expose the duplicity of that kind of a movement, So many of the people who were involved in that movement, maybe with the best of intentions, or maybe not, there is abuse going on. But none of this has to do with Jesus. None of it has to do with Jesus or sex-positive, pleasure-centered Christianity. It's all about Greco-Roman Platonic thought and philosophy. They got woven in very early by the church fathers, who have some interesting sex stories themselves. Gender rigidity for males, and there's also for females, but for men, the gender rigidity of the patriarchy, that's what that's about. It's about empire. The way an empire works, I use that word instead of patriarchy because it's really not about men, it's about power. Empire is about power, and the way it works is some bodies have more value than other bodies, period. There's this toxic masculinity. So let me introduce you to the work by Carol Gilligan in the book called Why the Patriarchy Persists. She says by the time a child is 5, he knows what it is to be male, what it is to be a little boy. Don't be a girl. Don't be a sissy. Don't be a wimp. Don't cry. Don't be vulnerable, in other words. So hide those emotions at all costs. If you don't, you're not a boy. And they know it by the age of 5. There's another lesson that comes up when they hear about teenagers, which is the incorporation of competition and violence as a strength, physical strength, as a part of that male identity. When someone is attracted to a male, that messes up the patriarchy or the empire's status. You have to know who's on top, and who's on top has to be gendered male, toxic masculinity. Having 2 men being intimate, nurturing, affirming, holding, caressing, that does not fit with the empire's ladder of status value. That's where so much of this anti-trans stuff is coming from. Men who have been trained to hang on to that rigid maleness, masculinity, whether gay or straight, are threatened by somebody that may be male this part of their life and female the other part of their life, or maybe they don't identify either way, or it's flexible, and so they don't fit on that status of the empire. Who's got the value? Those men are going to push back against that and make laws and do horrible things, particularly to trans women whom they view as male. Again, if you understand the premise of empire, which Jesus was against, by the way, then you understand what's really operating in our headlines. And then what gay men, lesbians as well, have to fight against. When I look at the stories of Jesus, I see somebody who is not into valuing somebody's more than others. For me, that's a key message that picks up on the Genesis story that we are all made in the image of God. And it's very, very good. And Jesus lived out, it seemed to me, an egalitarian relationship, honoring Mary's wanting to sit with the men and learn at his feet. And he honored people who were ritually impure, talked with women he wasn't supposed to be talking to. He allowed women to touch him without, shrieking and running off to be purified. So he was always violating the rules that an empire religion at that time had set up. So we have permission to break the rules that somebody else set up for you. When I start talking about sexual freedom and being who God wants you to be, without the rules, but listening to the inner voice, then hedonism comes up. And then people think, oh, we don't have the rules. Oh, my goodness. That is exactly what the church fathers were afraid of, because they did not know the difference between pleasure and irresponsible hedonism. And there's a huge, huge difference. I'm saying, well, let me quote Martin Luther, who wrote to a friend, once he understood grace, he said, so let us sin boldly. How about that? From the reformer himself, sin boldly. What that means is You rest in the grace of God to always forgive, always be there for you, wishing the best for you, right? But we are bound ethically by one major rule that cannot be broken. And they came to Jesus and they said, okay, now which one's the best commandment? Which one is the greatest? And he responded, it is to love. People are used to obeying, then how do you obey love? Well, you can't obey love. You express love. You live love. You become love. You become lovers. Love has to be the answer because what we're up against is a death-dealing mindset. It's a death-dealing empire. Empire eats those people on the bottom. And so we have to build loving communities. We have to reach out with respect and equality to understand that this is where life is. This is what we were made for. That when we can live playfully and with abandon because we trust those around us, then we can more fully be who God wants to reveal us to be. The more our heart heals, our soul heals, and we can be in our bodies in loving ways. Maker of good feelings and pleasurable bodies, forgive us when we deny our delicious feelings rather than celebrating them. Forgive us when we stop our ears from hearing the call to move in our sensual bodies, to dance with the joy and delight that is our birthright. Thank you for those who enjoy life with us. We are grateful for the wonder of our bodies and the depth of the experiences they provide. May it be that in our abandonment to pleasure, we see you better as the creator of such goodness. Thank you.
Let me set the scene for you. I traveled down to Florida to attend Southeast Yearly Meeting. It's an annual gathering of Quakers from Florida and nearby states. I was a guest speaker. We spent time in worship beside a lake quietly patrolled by alligators. They terrified me. We dived into conversations about Quaker faith, the state of democracy in the U.S., and our favorite flavors of ice cream. Quakers, long known for silent worship, know how to kick up some dust, whether at a protest or a yearly gathering. So after the serious talks and long hours of silence, one night we pushed the tables and chairs to the edge of the room. The music started, the square dancing began. And as always, the Quakers broke the rules, even on the dance floor. I saw men dancing with men, gender non-binary couples, boys in skirts, a grandmother spinning in her wheelchair, a grandchild holding on tight.
You got it. Circle to the left. Do-si-do. Swing this one. And you promenade. Join hands to the middle now. Circle left. And back to the right. And you do-si-do, a new designated driver. And swing. Now promenade the ring. Make a circle into the middle and back you
Come to conclusion, Peterson. That's what we do in Orlando meeting. We talk about each other.
New designated driver, Dulce.
Whether it's a drag queen in a library, a priest in a sari, or a minister preaching pleasure from the pulpit, what you heard today was about breaking open out of shame, out of roles, out of silence. In our show today, you heard from Revd Dr. Christina Beardsley, priest, theologian, and co-author of Affirming Churches. Learn more about Tina and her work on Wikipedia. Casey Chu, also known as Panda Dulce, is a drag queen, writer, filmmaker, and much more. Kyle recently published the book, The Queen Bees of Tybee County. Definitely read it. It's a lot of fun, and it's very moving. You can find their work at KyleCaseyChu.com. Chu is spelled C-H-U. And you heard from Reverend Dr. Beverly Dale, or Rev Bev. She's the author of Who Told You That You Were Naked? She's also the founder of the Incarnation Institute for Sex and Faith. Learn more at beverlydale.org. Bubble and Squeak is written and produced by me, Peter Santiscano. I mostly make the show for myself. Oh, and for my friend John Casey, who taught me how to journal again. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay curious, be weird, and make room for yourself to shimmer, sparkle, and shine.